We seem to be hearing a lot about refugees these days, not just those seeking refuge in the United States, but around the world. By many accounts, there are at least 47 million refugees around the world today, mostly refugees in Africa and South Asia. But even in the United States, a fair number of people entering our country without visas claim to be refugees. Turns out, this is nothing new, either for our country or for the world at large. In fact, many claim that the family of Jesus became refugees themselves. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Thursday, January 9th, 2025. So all this week I'm talking about the meaning of the holiday we call Epiphany, which centers on the story of the visitation of the Magi to the newborn Christ child. The center of gravity of that story is the opening of the kingdom of God to the Gentiles, but there are other takeaways from the story. For example, the idea that God thwarts the evil intentions of the tyrant King Herod, signaling the beginning of the end for tyrants in the world. Yet another takeaway is the simple observation that, at least for a while, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus had to flee for their lives to avoid Herod's awful plan to slaughter all the children in Bethlehem 2 years old and under. Here again is that story, which comes immediately after the story of the Magi. Now, after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." A refugee, of course, is someone who has to flee one's country out of fear of persecution, whether for political or religious beliefs or simply because of their race. Refugees are also people who flee their country because of ongoing war or internal armed conflict. Right now, the greatest number of refugees in the world are people fleeing Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Venezuela. And that's not to mention people who were displaced from their homes but remain in their own countries. Seems like that's a pretty good description of the plight of the Holy Family. A despotic king desperate to hang on to power by eliminating a perceived threat. But what exactly does that mean for us? I know of plenty of theological types who seem to make perhaps too great a leap of logic here. Jesus was a refugee, therefore we should receive any and all who claim refugee status. And while one can certainly make a pretty strong argument for accommodating refugees, difficulties quickly arise, not the least of which is the fact that not all who claim to be refugees are in fact refugees. Simply wanting to immigrate from one's own country doesn't make you a refugee. Many who seek to enter the United States, for example, without proper documentation do claim refugee status, but when their claims are finally adjudicated, their claims are sometimes found lacking. And in turn, that leads some to want to close our borders to anyone, even those who have legitimate claims to be refugees. And that's also a major problem. The devil, as they say, is in the details. But lifting up the plight of refugees doesn't even seem to be the point of the story for the author of this gospel. The point in telling the story is to claim, in his words, that this was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." In other words, in this specific context, it's more about connecting this event to the words of the prophet Hosea, rather than highlighting the plight of the refugees. But that still doesn't in any way negate or downplay the importance of refugees, or take away from the significance of the fact that Jesus' family became refugees when he was a small child. The question is, what do we do with this? Strictly speaking, for myself, this is a reminder that somewhere very near the heart of the gospel is a real concern for the poor and the oppressed, for widows and orphans, and yes, for refugees. We show contempt for refugees at our own peril. Tomorrow, refugees in their own country. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.